Loyalty is one of those qualities that almost no one questions. We're raised to believe that it's a virtue and that staying, no matter the cost, is what good and honorable people do. We applaud those who endure. We admire those who don't walk away. We tell stories of people who stick it out in marriages and in careers and in friendships and even families. And we call that character. But what we rarely ask, though, is what did it cost them? Because loyalty does have a shadow. And for many of us, that shadow looks like staying far past the point when we're okay. Far past the point where we're seen. Past the point where our presence is actually sustainable, let alone respected. See, we don't talk about this often because the story of loyalty is baked deep into our cultural myths that we admire the most. The soldier who never deserts, the partner who sticks around no matter what, the employee who never complains, the friend who always picks up, even when it's one-sided. But sometimes what we're calling loyalty is actually self-abandonment that is dressed up in virtue. It's this slow erosion of our boundaries, our values, our voice, all because we don't want to be the one who leaves, the one who quits, the one who gave up. And so we stay. We stay in jobs that drain us because we owe them for taking a chance on us. We stay in relationships where the intimacy dried up years ago because we said forever. We stay in communities where we're tolerated but we're never truly known because they were once there for us. And we stay not because we're alive there, but because we don't want to seem disloyal. But the truth is this: loyalty that requires the betrayal of ourselves is not loyalty. That's compliance, that's fear, that's the nervous system. It's just trying to maintain safety in the face of emotional extinction. And we usually pay for this. Not all at once. That would be easier to notice, wouldn't it? But slowly, over time, in the form of anxiety and depression and fatigue that no amount of sleep can touch, and numbness where our hope used to once be. When staying too long becomes a pattern, we don't just betray our future, we start also betraying our presence. We show up with this half presence. We speak with watered down voices and we love with gloves on. We become, in essence, ghosts of the selves that we were becoming. But we tell ourselves it's the right thing. And we moralize our self-betrayal. We call this endurance and we call it strength. And we say things like, it's not that bad. And they've done so much for me. Or I just can't leave. And each time we do this, we disappear a little further. Not to those around us, but because they may not even notice, but more so to ourselves. And this is the hardest kind of disconnection to name because it looks like character. It sounds like love. It wears the clothes of integrity. But inside, it's hollow. See, here at Uber Binsters, this is exactly the kind of fracture that I want to work to eliminate and illuminate as well, because this form of emotional self-erasing is both culturally celebrated and also deeply damaging. Integrity, as we define it, it's not about staying no matter what, it's about alignment. It's about making your actions still reflect your values and not just your fears. And intimacy is not showing up out of obligation. So it's showing up from a place of truth, where your yes actually means yes. And when we talk about rebuilding like this bridge back to ourselves and to each other, we have to include this, and that is that sometimes the most intimate, honest, and aligned thing you can do is to leave, or pull back, or renegotiate the terms of that connection. Because presence without integrity is not love, it's performance. And performance always comes at a cost. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from staying silent when everything in you is screaming to speak up. I mean, I can remember this clearly for myself. And I was in a leadership setting, one that prided itself on growth and ethics and impact. But over time, I began to see things unraveling from the inside. And I watched as decisions were made that contradicted the very values that we claim to uphold. And I saw people with vision and people who cared raise like gentle but urgent concerns. And they were not only ignored, eventually they were just pushed out. And still I stayed. Not only did I stay though, I also stayed quiet. I told myself I was being wise, that I was choosing my battles. But deep down, I knew I was afraid. Afraid of being labeled difficult, afraid of burning bridges, afraid of speaking truth that might cost me access, safety, or even reputation. So I bit my tongue and I kept showing up and I kept nodding in rooms when I just wanted to scream. And what broke me wasn't just what happened to me, it was also what I watched happen to others. People I respected, people who dared to name the problems, people who stepped into those same rooms with courage and clarity, only to be met with silence or this slow exile. They left, not because they didn't care, but because they were left to carry the cost of confrontation alone. And I watched them walk away, burned out, disillusioned, heartbroken, and I was still there, still loyal, still silent. And in that silence, I began to feel the edges of self-betrayal setting in. Because loyalty that demands your silence in the face of harm isn't loyalty at all, that's complicity. But we don't call it that, do we? We call it wisdom, we call it emotional maturity. We tell ourselves this isn't the right time, or that's just how leadership works, or it's not my place, right? And we rationalize to ourselves and eventually get paralyzed in the process. And we confuse cowardice for diplomacy. And every time we silence ourselves, we preserve a structure, a relationship, a reputation where we sacrifice bits of our integrity. And those pieces don't grow back on their own. It took me years to name what really happened in those seasons. To admit that I'd traded honesty for acceptance. To reckon with the fact that I let my silence protect power rather than protect people. It's still hard to say these things out loud. It still stings. But the truth is, staying too long, especially in silence, reshapes you. You become someone who calculates every word, who questions even your own instincts, and who learns how to fit in instead of standing up. And here's what's even harder. We often get praised for this. People call us stable, and they say we're easy to work with. They admire our ability to stay above the fray. But on the inside, our integrity is cracking, and our inner world is screaming, saying, this isn't right. This is not who I am. And yet we show up the next day with a composed face and a fractured core. And it's no wonder that people burn out, not just from the work, but from that internal dissonance. And sometimes that burnout doesn't come as flames. It comes as numbness, where we stop caring, we stop feeling, we just shut down the part of us that notices what's wrong, because noticing it would demand change. And change would mean risk. And so we bury it. But buried awareness becomes self-betrayal because it teaches you that truth has no home inside your loyalty. That's what I had to unlearn. That staying is not always a sign of strength. Sometimes it's a refusal to feel. And it's why now in every space that I serve and teach and lead, I no longer measure loyalty by how long someone stays. I measure it instead with whether they're still fully present, whether they're still whole, whether their truth is still welcome. Because loyalty that requires one's silence or one's suppression or one's soul is not integrity. That's imprisonment. And for me, reclaiming my voice wasn't about becoming defiant. It was about finally becoming real. Finding my voice again, wasn't cinematic. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. There was no dramatic confrontation, no mic drop moments, no righteous exits. It was quieter than all that. It was messier. It started with this tremble, not in my voice, but in my gut. A persistent sort of unease every time I sat through another meeting where I had to swallow what I wanted to say. Every time I nodded in agreement to avoid friction. Every time someone else left and I stayed again. The cost was becoming clear, not just in what I was witnessing, but in what I was also withholding. And I began to realize that if I didn't start speaking, I wouldn't just lose trust in the institution, I would lose trust also in myself. And I think that's the most dangerous erosion of all. So I started small, not by calling people out, but by calling myself back in. I started to chronicle what I was afraid to say out loud. I practiced honesty in spaces that felt safe. I paid attention to what made me go silent, and then I started asking why. And then ever so slowly, I started to speak. Maybe it was a question in a room where questions weren't usually welcome. Maybe it was naming discomfort when it felt easier to say, I'm fine. Maybe it was something simple as not laughing at a joke that crossed the line, refusing to add my silence as consent. These weren't grand acts of rebellion. They were acts of returning, each small step toward remembering that I did have a voice, that I didn't need to be disrespectful to be honest, that I didn't need to explode to stop erasing myself. What surprised me most was how hard it was to speak. It was even more surprising how much energy I spent in not speaking. I mean, silence is not passive, right? Silence takes work. It takes contortion, it takes strategy, it takes a toll on the body and your nervous system. And I'd been exhausted and I hadn't known why. But once I started aligning with the words and my inner truth, just in these small doses, there was shifts beginning to happen where I felt less anxious and less resentful and less like I was leading this double life. And most importantly, I started to forgive myself. Forgive myself for all those years that I stayed, for all those truths that I swallowed, for all the people I didn't stand with when they needed someone beside them. Because I hear this once, shame doesn't heal anyone. But compassion can create these new beginnings. And so I let myself feel again. And here's what I discovered in the process. The people who benefit from your silence will never applaud your truth, but your soul will, and your future will. And eventually new people will also begin to celebrate it, because people who don't need your loyalty to look like self-abandonment, they're actually drawn to your clarity, not just your compliance. People who trust you because you tell the truth, not because you're pretending that everything is fine. That's what happens when you reclaim your voice and you start to find your real community in the process. Not just the ones who tolerate you, but the ones who see you. And this is something I now speak about often in the work that I'm doing here at Uber Vintagers, because I think so many of us, we've lived too long in these roles that we didn't choose, playing characters that we didn't create just to keep the peace. But there's no peace in betrayal of oneself. There's only this quiet disintegration. So I want to help people rebuild, not by telling them to blow everything up, but by helping them to first listen again to the parts of themselves that have never stopped whispering, this isn't it. You are meant for more than this mask, or you're allowed to be loyal to your truth. See, that's the version of loyalty that I believe in now. Not a loyalty to institutions, not a loyalty to the roles, not loyalty to the systems that reward silence, but loyalty to alignment, loyalty to presence, loyalty to the kind of love that doesn't really require one to disappear to stay connected. And it's not perfect. I mean, I still get scared. I still feel that tug to stay silent and not to rock the boat. But now the question I ask is, what is the cost to all this? I'm no longer willing to pay that cost with my soul. If I want to live in a world where people stop disappearing inside of their own lives, I think we need to completely rethink how we define loyalty in the first place. Because right now, loyalty is often rewarded in proportion to how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice. You showed up while you're burned out? Ah, that's loyal, right? You stayed in a job, that relationship, or even that system where it didn't quite align with the values that you hold. That must be loyalty, right? You kept quiet to protect the group or the brand or the institution. Loyal. But what if we've been applauding the wrong thing? What if the version of loyalty that we've been taught is actually the very blueprint for erasing ourselves? We rarely ask kids, teens, even adults, to whom or to what should your loyalty belong? Because that answer matters. Loyalty to a person can be beautiful. Loyalty to a value, though, is even better. But loyalty to an image or a reputation or a dysfunctional structure, that's just a slow emotional death in a socially acceptable outfit. We need this cultural upgrade, I think, one that stops rewarding quiet endurance and starts celebrating honest alignments. We need to teach people that staying, no matter the cost, is always a painful cost, because sometimes staying is the least integrity that we take, right? Imagine a world, for example, where we taught loyalty like this. Loyalty means staying only when you can remain whole. Or loyalty means naming when something is no longer working before it breaks you. Or loyalty means speaking truth even when it shakes the tables. Or loyalty means you don't have to abandon yourself to prove that you're committed. That's the kind of world that I want to live in. It's the kind of loyalty that I want to model for my kids, my friends, my community. Because here's what I now know, I think. There's no honor in enduring what is killing you just so that you can make other people comfortable. There's no virtue in silently bleeding out just because the world is applauding your strength. And there's no legacy, I think, in performing loyalty to something that never really truly saw or acknowledged your existence as you are. So let's redefine this. Let's teach loyalty instead as something that flows from alignment, not obligation. Let's teach our kids that staying is not always strength, and that leaving is not always failure. Let's stop calling people flaky or disloyal for choosing their peace or their boundaries or even their truth. Because what looks like quitting is sometimes just someone refusing to die on the inside for another year. And what looks like walking away is someone who's finally walking back to themselves. This is the kind of emotional literacy I think we're cultivating here at Uber Vintagers as we create the work that we do. It's where loyalty is not about how much you can tolerate, but how deeply you can live with integrity. And where intimacy is not just about leaving, but about also showing up for your full self and creating space for others to do likewise. See, I don't want more loyalty that looks like quiet suffering. I don't think we need loyalty that looks like abandoning yourself, but one that is rooted in clarity and courage. Loyalty that says, I love you, but I can't disappear and keep carrying on as if nothing's wrong when something doesn't fit. I want to stay, but only if I can stay whole. Because the world does not need more martyrs of our performance. It needs more models of integrity, more people who are willing to choose truth over tradition, or health over habits, or courage over comfort. So if you're listening to this and feeling like you're right in the middle of this tug of war between staying or leaving, between silence or speaking up, between what's expected and what's true, hear me on this one here. You're not disloyal for choosing yourself. You're not selfish for walking away from something that asks you to trade your soul for belonging. And you're not wrong for noticing what no longer fits. In fact, I think you are right on time. And the question is no longer, how long can I endure this? I think the better question is, what kind of life am I building? And does this still belong in it? Because loyalty will ask you to stay, but integrity will ask you to stay aligned. And your job is to choose which one you're more loyal to. Let me know how this episode landed for you. Do you have any anecdotes, some stories or experiences along the way where you're like, oh, here's what it looked like for me? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear. Thanks for watching.